Thank you so much for coming to this exciting event. Before we introduce our speakers, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly share with you the background of this ancient Korean studies series. Together with my colleagues at Yale and also in Korea, also in collaboration with Dr. Hongnam Kim, who is an Emerita professor at Ewha University, and also who earned her PhD from Yale Art History back in 1985, and also who is a formerly director of the National Museum of Korea. So we have brainstormed and planned to the launch of this speaker series for the past 2 years. So our goal is very clear: to complement Yale's existing strength in modern and contemporary Korean studies by advancing into ancient Korean studies. So this area of research is essential for understanding Korea through both trans-regional and trans-interdisciplinary lenses. So as part of this effort, we have hosted this speaker series for the past 2 years. This year marks a significant milestone. We have formally composed a team of the core and advisory faculty members for this initiative. And also we unveiled a new Yale's Korean Studies website. I highly recommend you take a look at it to find more detailed information about this initiative. So among the core faculty is Professor Anne Underhill from the Department of Anthropology, who is a renowned specialist in East Asian archaeology, particularly China. She's kindly agreed to introduce our speakers and also respond to their talks and then moderate our Q&A sessions. Without further ado, please welcome our Professor Underhill.
Introduce the two incredible scholars we have here today. And we have a great opportunity to learn about early Korea from different methodological perspectives. And so this is a very rare opportunity. Professor Martine Robbeets is head of the Language and Anthropocene Research Group at the Planck Institute of Geoanthropology in Jena, Germany, and professor, Department of English and Linguistics at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. She is highly respected for her many years of research on the history of trans-Eurasian languages, including Japanese, and she began with her doctorate in comparative linguistics at Leiden University in the Netherlands, and her habilitation degree at Johannes Gutenberg University. But even before that, she has 2 master's degrees, one in Korean studies at Leiden University and one in Japanese studies at Catholic University in Belgium. She has been involved in many projects, collaborating with linguists, archaeologists, geneticists in many parts of East Asia and beyond, with publications in many kinds of languages. And she just finished a major project with a large grant from the European Union with a wonderful title, Language and Beans, Millet and Genes, the Dispersal of Trans-Eurasian Languages. And one of the publications for this is in a special issue of Evolutionary Human Sciences by Cambridge University Press. So it's my great pleasure to meet Professor Robbeets for the first time. Professor Gyoung-Ah Lee is an equally incredible scholar who has been educating me about the archaeology of Korea and the fascinating things that analysis of plant remains in archaeology can tell us for many years. Professor Lee has been publishing about the archaeology of plant remains from all over East Asia and Southeast Asia for many years. And she is currently, she's been a professor of anthropology at the University of Oregon for quite some time, and she earned her PhD in anthropological archaeology at the University of Toronto, where I first met her. And so she'll tell us about what archaeologists can learn from plant remains, many different kinds of plant remains, and what we can learn about early subsistence systems, including agriculture. And as I mentioned, she's been publishing on many different sites, or early sites all over China, Japan, and Korea. And she has been excavating a really fascinating and important site in southern Korea. So please join me in welcoming both of these scholars today. And our first speaker will be Professor Martine Robbeets, talking about From Foraging to Farming in Prehistoric Korea, a View from Linguistics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Underhill, for your introduction. Professor Underhill, Professor Kim, Professor Lee, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and students, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my research here today in front of this esteemed audience at Yale University, but also for setting up a meeting with Professor Gyoung-Ah, with whom we planned a meeting, but it unfortunately failed at the time of the COVID pandemic. So I think that Professor Lee's contribution to the subsistent changes in prehistoric Korea can hardly be overstated. It provides the first directly dated sequence of crops and also the first systematic archaeobotanic approach from Chumun to Mumun times. So it is on this topic am I doing it right? Ah, yeah. Okay. It's on this topic, so the transition of foraging to farming in prehistoric Korea, that I would like to shed a linguistic light today. And for this purpose, I will first introduce the origin and early dispersal of the Korean language as a trans-Eurasian language. And next, I will map the prehistoric language dynamics of Korean on climate change and archaeobotany. And then finally, I would like to turn to some of the big questions of Korean agricultural prehistory. Of course, linguistics alone will never be able to solve the big questions of human prehistory. But taking it together with genetics, archaeobotany, palaeoclimatology, it may add a certain validity and credibility to our research findings. So I use the term trans-Eurasian throughout my research in reference to this large group of geographically adjacent languages reaching all the way from the Pacific in the east to the Baltic, the Mediterranean, and the Black Sea in the west, and including up to 5 different linguistic families. So Japonic here in purple, then Koreanic in yellow, then you see these red dots of Tungusic languages in red, the Mongolic languages in blue, and then all the Turkic languages in green. The very question whether these 5 different linguistic families go back to one single common ancestor is among the most disputed issues of historical comparative linguistics. And in a paper which I produced with my group for Nature a few years ago, we argued that there is a small core of reliable evidence relating Korean to the trans-Eurasian languages as a valid genealogical grouping. And we use the term Proto-Trans-Eurasian in reference to the ancestral language. And we assume that the speakers of the ancestral language lived in northeast China's West Liao River region, and that they were millet farmers. So using Bayesian statistics, this is the tree we generated for Trans-Eurasian. So basically it's a binary tree structure where with a split between Japano-Koreanic on the one hand and then Altaic on the other hand. We use the term Altaic in reference to Turkic, Mongolic, and Tungusic. And the root of the family goes back 9,200 years in time. And here you see a modeling over space. So Trans-Eurasian is situated in the West Liao River area, breaks up into Altaic and Japano-Koreanic. And then Turkic is the first to separate from Altaic and to move into the eastern steppe. And then Koreanic goes to the Korean peninsula. Then Tungusic moves to the Russian Far East, followed finally by Japonic, moving over the Korean peninsula to Kyushu on Japan, from where it spreads all over the Japanese islands. So recently we tried to add palaeoclimate records to our archaeobotanical and linguistic data set. And basically the archaeobotanic record shows the following trend. You first have like an increase of temperature and moisture in the early Holocene, and then it peaks in the middle Holocene, and then it decreases again in the late Holocene. But even if you find there's a temperature increase in the early Holocene, we see a small term period of climate reversal, a few centuries, around 9,200 BP. And that is exactly the time of the domestication of broomcorn millet in the West Liao River region, there where you see the blue dot. So it is not unthinkable that due to the deteriorating climate conditions, the people adopted millet cultivation by way of diversifying their food spectrum. Now, independently, using linguistic tools alone, we date the origin of our language family to 9,200 BP, which is exactly at the time of this climate reversal. And we situate Proto-Trans-Eurasian also in this West Liao River basin. Comparing words between Korean and other Trans-Eurasian languages, words that relate to agriculture, we can undo the similarities and reconstruct original words in the Trans-Eurasian ancestral language. And there we can reconstruct various agricultural words like words for field, for cultivation, components that are removed from the millet harvest, cooked cereal, a cultivar suffix. So this suggests that the speakers of Trans-Eurasian were familiar with these concepts, that they had agriculture, and it also suggests that words for agriculture dispersed from the West Liao River region to Korea, along with the millet farmers and their languages. Whereas Korean and Trans-Eurasian do not share any maritime vocabulary, Japanese and Korean does share maritime vocabulary. So we can reconstruct words for sea, boat, swellfish, crab, back to Proto-Japano-Koreanic. And this seems to suggest that after the breakup, the Japano-Koreanic speakers moved towards the coast, and that they also added maritime subsistence to their subsistence package. In addition, we also find foraging terms shared between these languages, suggesting that it was a mixed subsistence, not only cultivation but also foraging and maritime subsistence. Then we move to the Middle Holocene, and there we see a second wave of climate cooling, known as the neoglaciation between 5,400 and 4,600 BP. And it is at the onset of neoglaciation that we see the first millet appearing on the Korean peninsula, at least in the Nung-Gokdok site. There on the map has the oldest directly dated millet. So it is not unthinkable that due to the climate deterioration, the millet farmers came from the Liaodong Peninsula into the Korean Peninsula with millet farming. Interestingly, the breakup of Koreanic from Japano-Koreanic, again, independently, is dated at exactly the same date, 5,500 BP. So that seems to be the time when not only millet farmers, but also Koreanic came to the Korean Peninsula. And Japanese and Korean share words for agriculture, as you see here, field for cultivation, barnyard millet, barnyard grass, but they do not share rice vocabulary. And that suggests that rice vocabulary was adopted later, so after the breakup of Japanese and Korean, so after 5,500 BP. We see that rice enters from the Yangtze River region in Shandong, somewhere between 7,000 and 4,600 BP. It takes a long time, several millennia, for rice to develop in a full-fledged Japonica type variety. And then we get another climate cooling, the Meghalanian drought, a global drought and cooling, also known as the 4.2 kiloyear event. And in Northeast Asia, we see that it comes actually in two waves, or one wave around 4,200 BP and another wave around 3,500 BP. And 3,500 BP is exactly the time of the spread of the rice millet farmers from the Shandong Peninsula to the Korean Peninsula, so the beginning of the Mumun period. There you see this blue dot indicating the Gyeodong site with the oldest rice on Korea, dated to about 3,400 BP. So after the breakup of Koreanic, the Koreanic speakers had several neighbors on the continent, such as Japonic speakers who remained in the area of Shandong and Liaodong after the breakup of Koreanic, but also Sino-Tibetan speakers associated with the Yangshao culture in the Middle Yellow River Basin, but probably also para-Austronesian speakers, that is, speakers of a sister language of Austronesian that have been associated with the Dainko culture on Shandong. So it is also thought that Japonic rice vocabulary was borrowed at a very early stage from Austronesian. Now, linguists would agree that by 3,000 years ago, at least two different language families, that is Japonic and Koreanic, were spoken on the Korean peninsula. And the speakers, and there's evidence that the speakers of Proto-Koreanic, that they were millet farmers who adopted rice agriculture and added it to their millet agricultural package, probably under influence of Japonic speakers. The evidence comes from there in the first table, in table 4, from the repurposing of Korean cereal vocabulary. So in Korean, you have some words like pap, meaning any boiled rice, or a word meaning held of any grain or any cooked cereal, that over the course of Korean history specialized as rice vocabulary. So from general agricultural vocabulary, it specialized for rice. Also, the last word in that table, nal, for example, is a plant, but adding a cultivar suffix -ak, it becomes narak, rice plant. So you get a repurposing of cereal vocabulary as rice vocabulary in Korean. And that indicates that a rice vocabulary was added later to the terminology. So rice was added later to a pre-existing agricultural package. And that, and probably it was added under influence of Japonic speakers, as a few scholars have suggested, loanwords relating to rice agriculture at a very early stage from Japonic into Koreanic. So words such as pyo, rice plant, or psal, uncooked rice, would have been borrowed from Japonic. So this all suggests that the Koreans adopted their rice vocabulary under influence of Japonic speakers. And then we move further to the late Holocene with another period of cooling, late Holocene cooling between 2900 and 2000 BP. And that is the time when wheat and barley come to the Korean peninsula. Barley is known as a relatively cold-resistant crop, which would be preferred in times of cooling. Professor Yi dates the oldest unambiguous wheat finds and barley finds to 2700 and 2300 BP, respectively. If we look at the situation in Eurasia, we see that around 3000 BC or 5000 BP, rice and millet are moving from the east to the west, so millet in red and rice in green, whereas barley is moving from the west, 5 minutes, thank you, to the east. Barley arrives, it's not until 3000 BC that barley arrives in the Altai, and from there it seems to spread to the upper Yellow River region, and then to the middle and the lower Yellow River region, to Shandong, and from Shandong to the Korean peninsula, to the Russian Far East, and barley, unambiguously dated barley, arrives rather late on Japan, namely 700 AD. This trajectory of barley from an archaeobotanic perspective is mirrored by the burrowing chain in linguistics. So we find in linguistics, in Indo-European, we find a root that is reconstructed as mruk for barley. Probably it was present in one of the branches, like Tocharian in Indo-European. From there it went into Proto-Tibeto-Burman as mruk, in Old Chinese as marak, in Proto-Koreanic as milgi, to Tungusic mirgi. In Tungusic you had the labialization of the vowel to murgi, and it was the labialized version that was borrowed in Japonic as munki. So due to the sound correspondences, we can determine the direction of the linguistic borrowing. And interestingly, the direction of the linguistic borrowing reflects this map very neatly, because in the Altai has been connected with speakers of the Tocharian branch of Indo-European, the upper Yellow River region with speakers of the Tibeto-Burman branch of Sino-Tibetan, and then middle Yellow River region, lower Yellow River region and Shandong after 900 BC with Old Chinese, then Koreanic on Korea, and Tungusic in the Russian Far East. So it's striking to say the least that the linguistic trajectory reflects the archaeobotanic trajectory so neatly. And then finally, beans. For beans, it's interesting because Korean does not seem to be the recipient of bean-related terminology, but only the source. So bean-related vocabulary seems to spread away from Korean. One example is this word for Jeju. It's soybean malt, which in early Middle Korean was mitsu, with a dental affricate, a ts, and this ts could only be represented or imitated in Japonic as a s, because Japonic did not have a dental affricate ts at that time, so it went from mitsu in Koreanic to miso in Japonic to misu in Manchuric. So this seems to indicate that this word was borrowed earlier than barley at a time when Japonic was still spoken on the Korean peninsula. And this aligns actually nicely with the findings of Professor Lee, who suggests that soybean was domesticated on the Korean peninsula. And she finds this high density of domesticated soybean in Korea in the Nam River sites around 3000 BP, which would nicely coincide with the linguistic timing. So then moving to the conclusion, what do these words tell us about the transition to farming in prehistoric Korea? First of all, I think that our words tell us about the secondary origin of agriculture in Korea, as it is supported by the linguistic inheritance. The agricultural vocabulary was inherited from Proto-Trans-Eurasian with a homeland, 1 minute, thank you, with a homeland in Northeast China's Westlia River region. Second, it tells us that the adoption of millet cultivation in the Chulmun is a foundational strategy. It's not just a minor detail in Korean prehistory, but it's a foundational strategy because it causes a major socio-linguistic change. And the change is that pre-existing hunter-gatherer languages or the speakers thereof abandon their language and adopt the language of the incoming Korean farmers. So that's really revolutionary. And something revolutionary must have happened. Then we also see a gradual transition to a multi-cropping system in the Mumun, and that is visible in the linguistic stratification. The linguistic stratification suggests that the words for broomcorn millet came in first, inherited from Trans-Eurasian. Then you have rice borrowed over Shandong. Then you have soybean diffusing from Korean into Tungusic. And then you have wheat and barley borrowed in this long chain from West Eurasia to East Eurasia. And that neatly reflects the archaeological dating or the archaeological chronology of the cultigens. And then it's not only the time, but also the space of the crop trajectories that are supported by the etymologies. We see how millet arrives from northeast China's Westlia River region, inherited. That rice goes from Shandong to the Korean peninsula. The words for barley all the way from West Eurasia to East Eurasia, and the words for soya bean diffuse starting from Korea. And then we can also say that the impulse for the agricultural transition and the associated language change was not a single factor, But it was a complex process. It was not only a climate, as would be suggested by ecological models, or migration, as would be suggested by social models, but in reality it was an interplay of different factors operating simultaneously or subsequently. By way of a conclusion, I would say that many different disciplines, genetics, archaeobotany, palaeoclimatology, can offer us a perspective into human prehistory. But this perspective is always fragmentary, it's always partial. Putting the different perspectives together, however, we can obtain a much more balanced view than each of these disciplines can give us independently. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I believe that we can gain much more from adding linguistics to the science of human history than we can lose by ignoring it. Thank you very much.
Professor Lee will talk about cultural heritage and traditional ecological knowledge of Neolithic islanders of Jeju? Jeju, Korea.
So I have time until... yeah, let's bring around this one. Sorry, I have time until 5:20. 20 to 5:20. Thank you for all coming this talk this Thursday afternoon. It is a pleasure to meet Dr. Ann Underhill again, and then Dr. Martine Robbeets and everybody else, particularly this morning, a lot of students. It was pleasure to travel to State of Constitution, right? I've been studying mostly inland, and I recently started to develop interest on Jeju Island, which is known to be Honeymoon Island or Hawaii of Korea. So I thought about maybe I can combine work and vacation together on this island, and my dream come true. So Jeju Island is quite different from Korean mainland. Okay. Again, did I do something wrong? Okay, come back. And it's a volcanic island. It's formed from emerging volcanic hollow mountain in the middle, and that became island Pliocene. But it has many volcanic eruptions as late as 11th century, and it made the 365 pyroclastic or satellite cones around the Jeju Island called Autumn. So it's a quite a beautiful island and have many different vegetation and ecology. And it's also generate many sightseeing sites and also scientists understanding topography, geography, and vegetation, including one of the autumn satellite cone called Gamun Autumn. And also all those different nature environments generate quite distinctive culture and language. I only understand, I'm native Korean, but I only understand half of the language of Jeju dialect. So it is question whether it is the same language or not. If I understand only half, it's probably more different than Spanish and Italian. And also generate many different culture, including this free diving woman's culture and different language, also particularly the basalt statue representing some different religious belief, and it generates a lot of good Netflix drama too, as you may know. See, the oldest pottery was discovered about 15 years ago. It's very coarse plant fiber pottery. Interestingly, this pottery was not found in mainland Korea, but rather Jeju Island. and it was directly dated to about 10,000 BP. And this artifact screen comes with terminal Paleolithic tools as well as new tools like a projectile, looks like arrowhead. And one of my colleagues and former students generated some interesting simulations, and you see how Jeju became Jeju. So Jeju was connected to Chinese continent and Japan by 20,000 BP, and last glacial maximum was still a part of southern part of China, including Jiangsu province, and it became island by 16,000 BP. But around a last glacial maximum, 20,000 BP, around to 16,000 BP, we have 2 Paleolithic sites were found in Japan, so probably peopling might be earlier. But most sites on Jeju Island from the early Holocene. And by 10,000 BP, when Jeju Island became completely, when the first pottery was found, Jeju was island, but coastline is further away. So I put the team together with a wonderful local archaeologist as well as colleagues from US to study about the different life on Jeju throughout the early Middle Holocene. So our question was understanding environmental conditions and changes based on stable isotope analysis on shells to know what kind of environment upfront on early Holocene people. And then also I want to know how the Jeju early islanders start to form the life throughout the landscape, because we found many different sites in different topography. And by analyzing soil micromorphology by a wonderful colleague from Korea University, and also making simulation model about movement pattern. And then when people move around, this mobility tightly relates to resource procurement, including everyday food, and the source for their major tools, which is pottery and stone tools. So we start analyzing plant remains from charred grain remains, as well as residue from pottery and stone tools by the form of starch and phytoliths. And also we want to know how those early Holocene pottery was made, what is the sourcing. So we start to apply INA, instrumental neuron activation analysis, as well as the other analysis. So it's an ongoing project. As I said, we have a wonderful local archaeologist that I've been working with years. This is a photo took in front of Kosan Cave site. We excavated 2022. And a lot of members working in University of Oregon, Oregon State, and Kyungbuk University. We excavated 3 sites and generated 3 site excavation report and 2 papers published and a couple of more papers in Korean. And we have a couple of drafts we'll send this year. So one of the major sites is Kosan Lee site that I will present today, as well as Kosan Cave site and East Coast Susan Lee site. And we are planning to have NSF applications to excavate more sites on north and south part to know about early Holocene adaptation. So residential mobility. In order to understand mobility, we focus on Kosan Cave and Kosan site, and some of the rock shelter site, and some of the shellfish site to know about environment. So isotope analysis on shellfish is ongoing, study is ongoing. Major site we focus is Kosan Lee site on the west coast. The site is open air site, as you see. An incredible amount of artifacts, pottery, and stone tools were found at this site. Gyoung-Ah Lee site is on the west central coast and is on the cliff, on the flat. It is very on the oceans, but when the Gyoung-Ah Lee Neolithic islanders were occupying the site, the coastline was further away. We were interested when archaeologists start to excavate, they look for houses, something like this, like pit houses, which most Neolithic sites in mainland Korea were produced. So we expect this one, but archaeologists were not able to find those. So because of those sites were so popular throughout the Neolithic period in Korea, and archaeologists reconstruct pit houses, something like this one. And then Jeju Islanders, archaeologists often assume maybe similar to Korean mainland, the Jeju people also live this kind of houses, but archaeologically we didn't find. So how they lived. Jeju, known to be also nickname of Jeju, is Samdado, meaning island with three many things. Three is, one of them are wind, it's a very high wind island, and stones, a lot of basalt rock, and women, because a lot of men are fishery and they accidentally fell, so a lot of women. So Jeju Island is not matriarchal society, but woman has a strong economic portion to it, as you see free diving women and different costume. So we excavated Gyoung-Ah Lee site. We didn't find any semi-terranean pit houses, but what we found is artifact concentration like this one. And artifact concentrations happen to be within or slightly outside of post hole. It is not pit houses, but archaeologists assemble this something like this hut, above ground hut. So Jeju Islanders continue to their tradition of making this type of above ground temporary housing compared to mainlanders who built pit houses. So, but by the Neolithic period, mainland artifacts came to Jeju, but it seems like they maintained this type of housing. So, and also another interesting part is some part of site showing high artifact concentration in some form of feature look like pits. So we further excavated and take the soil sample to know about whether there is any human impact on that area. So Dr. Lee Hee-jin in Korea University analyzed microsoil morphology. What she found is this Jeju pit and housing area is not like hardened floor like mainland Neolithic period, but more like frequent, consistent revisit in that area for probably stone tool making or pottery making. And it showed definitely this is the kind of home base the people come to possibly seasonally over the years, but doesn't have that signature of the permanent residence that we found mainland Korea Neolithic period. So this is a micro-scale analysis, but we want to see also big picture. So one of my former postdoc, Dr. Habam Kim, start to see mapping entire Jeju Island. So those blue dots are where the Neolithic sites were found. And then he named the from here to here analysis. It is not list coast path. It doesn't assume the origin or destination. It based on topography, land cover, hydrology. He modeled how those sites were connected by the footpath. And interestingly, those footpaths showing also where the major road historically, and also still those roads were used as the main road currently. So it's an ongoing study. So one of our projects is to know how those different early Holocene and then Middle Neolithic people move around, what is the seasonality, what attract them, what kind of resource attract them, and how they were different from mainland Neolithic period, and how their early housing looks like. So part of the analysis published in Journal of Archaeological Science report, and we are working on this paper, more macro vision, for next project. So it seems like, as I said, mainlanders and Jeju Islanders continue different traditions through Neolithic period, because throughout the Neolithic period on Jeju, there is no pit houses, but the husk-like above-ground temporary base camp continue throughout the Neolithic period for 7,000 years. But artifacts are abundant in major Kosan-Lee early Holocene and Middle Holocene site. It means they probably continue to visit the site and revisit for certain reason that we want to find out. So, as I said earlier, our third question is about what attract people, Neolithic people in particular sites, mostly along the coast, but some of them inland from the coast. So one of the things is food. So we try to trace the food by analyzing and floating soil samples. So you see one of my PhD students, Dr. Hyun-Soo Lee, working on artifacts, pottery, and stone tools to extract microplant remains, as well as we floated enormous amount of soils. Interestingly, where the major early Holocene site called Kosan-Lee located is relatively flat land with a marshland nearby, which is very rare environment on Jeju Island as a highly porous basalt landscape. And this area gives some clay. So traditionally, through the Joseon Dynasty in modern times, traditional potters stayed in this area because it is where the clay sourcing is. So one of my students also going through the, former students going through the islands to find out the clay. So now we are cooperating geologists in Korea University as well as Oregon State University to analyzing clay sourcing, also where those pottery layer elements come from. So those are the grinding stone tools we found from 10,000 years old site as well as later Neolithic site. And my students and I start to find many different type of starch remains. So when plantosaurs were grounded, these grounded stone tools, or cooked on pottery, those porous surface is an excellent catch area, all the starch granules embedded into it. So by using as a simple tool as a toothbrush, electronic toothbrush, we extract samples and analyze. It seems like a panicoid, which is the millet subfamily. All the domesticated millet belong to this subfamily. We cannot say it is millet or not just by looking at starch, but we start to find many different panicoid species, like this, something like looks like barnyard glass, as well as Setaria species, which belong to foxtail millet. And also, interesting, we found some tuber starch, including snake gold, which is gourd family, which is generating usually really huge root for starch food, which is also common in southern China. As well as the wheat family, the grains. And interestingly, we found some starch remain look quite like hua, which is the genus of jobsteers. The wild jobsteers domesticated Africa. We don't say it's the domesticated one, but wild jobsteer species, native species in southern China. In my earlier map, I show Jeju were connected to southern China up until 16,000 BP. So it's quite possible, but we are looking for more modern reference. And we go into the inlands to know the mobility pattern. So we excavate one of the Gosan, near the Gyoung-Ah Lee site, which is in this coast, called the Gosan Cave site, which is vertical cave. When we went to excavation in this cave site, we had an episode. We first day of excavation, when we moved our equipment in, we found a snake. So we thought this is good luck. So we wish for nobody hurt. This is slippery cave, dark cave site, which is about 120 meters long, and nobody injured. And in this site, we opened the 3 pit, 4x4 pit inside, and we flotated almost all soils. So flotation took as long as excavation. And this result has not been published yet. We are studying more, but interestingly, the layers that where the incipient and early Neolithic pottery were found, we also found some of the domesticated charred grains, including foxtail millet and ajiki bean and wheat. But I'm not saying those belong to Neolithic period at the moment because I was not able to AMS dating any of it because not enough carbon. And I don't want to date only 1 or 2 until I found more. But what we dated the charred wood charcoal associated with those findings was datings to 4400, 4000 BC. Interestingly, when I after studied the central site in Nungok that Dr. Martine Robbeets presented, I found millet impressions on pottery, early Neolithic pottery, which dating 6400 BP. So it's probably millet came much earlier to Korean Peninsula, but about 5500 BP is the time it is really spread. And we found a lot of starch granules from the pastures from Gosan Cave. Similar to Gosan site, we found both tubers, starch from tubers, starch from grains. And this West Coast site we just opened last year will continue to excavate on the East Coast site. And interestingly, some of the starch remains showing this damage, probably by cooking, making a soup. I want to say it's fermented for alcohol, but evidence is so low at the moment, so we are continuing to work on those postures. One of my colleagues from Gyeongbuk University did isotope analysis from the pottery sherd to know about the plant, the food sourcing. Good thing about isotope analysis is it can be extracted from fatty acid smeared into the pottery while it is boiled, the food is boiled, and we can roughly know what kind of food group was cooked inside a pot, including either deer, ungulate, or like wild boar, terrestrial, or fish, or plants including acorn or rice like C3 plants or millet, C4 plants. Interestingly, Gyoung-Ah Lee site sample does not show any marine residue diet. It all show either plants or terrestrial, wild boar, and deers. So as earlier said, Gyoung-Ah Lee site has very on the coast, but interestingly, these people does not look like a substitute with a fish or marine food. And stone tool analysis show very small amount of stone tool probably function for fishing. Instead, majority of tools like hunting or grinding plant remains. So lithic analysis, isotope analysis, plant analysis shows all the same picture. And interestingly, Gyoung-Ah Lee site, which you see here, is not far from Chagi small islet, which is the only source of tuff that the better stone material than basalt to making stone tools. And there are most majority of stone tools made on Gosan, as well as other sites in the same time period on Jeju Island are probably from this island. So we can say Jeju Island visit this site often to sourcing clay, which we have a tentative evidence, as well as the stone tools. And while they are residing, they need to eat something. So I wonder why there's no fishing tools much. We don't have a bone remains, so I cannot know what fish. So we identified historically, also archaeologically known fish species along the Jeju Island. And as you see, all the fish species are not available in summer, or not all available in summer on the west coast of Jeju. But the summer is not the time to go to west coast. The wind is really strong. The most recent highest wind, it was a 60 meter per second, which is documented well, like this, is flying over the containers. So west coast is known to very high wind. So with that kind of temporary housing, like above ground hut, will not sustain. I went there in summer, just experiment myself. I couldn't stand still near the coast, that strong wind. So probably Jeju Island didn't visit in summer or winter, which is also high wind. That means all those near bay fish easily can coat were not available to them. So they went there probably the site spring or summer to get sourcing for lithic or pottery. So that's the reason they couldn't do most fishing in that time period. And they are really sourcing the plants, foraging, as well as wild deers and wild boar. They, because of those particular environmental settings and their way of living, continued throughout the Neolithic period, the 7,000 years, making a particular traditional ecological knowledge, although they have a knowledge of mainlanders. Mainlander comes to this Jeju Island, and they adopted some of the pottery style and types, but they never really followed the lifestyle. I want to continue to learn about it, because Jeju Islands still have a very specific traditional way of living and culture, as well as linguistics. So stay tuned, more to come. Thank you.
Well, thank you both so much. We wanted to give everyone here plenty of opportunity to ask questions, so we have mics that will be presented to you when you want to ask a question of either of our speakers, and I see someone with their hand up already. So, oh, there, great.
Thank you so much for both of your talks. And I have a question to Dr. Martine Robbeets. So you described a spread of Japonic to the Korean peninsula, and I kind of personally found it a little bit troubling. And what are the assumptions behind calling it Japonic at that stage? And couldn't it be just as easily be labeled pre-Koreanic or a shared ancestral language?
Thank you very much for your question. That amounts a bit to the question whether Koreanic was first on the peninsula or whether Japonic was there first. Oh, sorry. Do you hear me now? Yeah. As you suggested, are indeed the ideas about the ideas among linguists are spread. So some people would think that Japonic arrived first, and as you suggest, and then others that Koreanic arrived first. I personally believe that we can argue that Koreanic was there first for a number of reasons. First reason is that in Koreanic we find a substrate of so-called Nifk, pre-Nifk, and Nifk is a language that is now spoken in the Amur and on Sakhalin, but that is probably a remnant of an earlier lineage that was pushed to the peripheries of Asia, just like Ainu. We might expect or assume that there were Amuric speakers on the Korean peninsula. And now Korean has a lot of similarities with Trans-Eurasian, but also a lot of atypical dissimilarities, strange things. And one of these strange things are certain structural features in the Korean sound system that align very much with Nif. So that kind of indicates that pre-existing people speaking Nifk shifted to Korean at an early time. Now we do not find any Nifk substratum in Japonic, only Ainu substratum. So if Japonic was first on the Korean peninsula, we would expect much more Nifk in Japonic and less in Koreanic, while the opposite is true. We find a big Nifk substratum in Koreanic, but not in Japonic. And a second reason is Koguryo. So we locate Japano-Koreanic, the common ancestor of Japanese and Korean, on the Liaodong Peninsula. And then one of the two languages leaves, 3500 BC. According to me, Korean leaves. According to your model and others, Japonic would leave. However, we know that Japonic stayed in the region for a long time because the Koguryo people who lived on the Liaodong Peninsula and in northern Korea, who go back to Puyo people. You had Puyo people splitting in Koguryo tribes, Okche and Yemek. And these people spoke a language that was probably much closer to Japonic than it was to Koreanic. So people like Christopher Beckwith have analyzed the Koguryo language, and we see that it's much more Japonic-like than Koreanic-like. So if the people on Liaodong stayed there, that were the people speaking Japonic, so the others went away, the Koreanic speakers. And the third reason then why I definitely think that Koreanic was first on the Korean peninsula is the rice agriculture, which with the examples that I showed you. So the Korean cereal vocabulary only in a later stage specialized for rice, which suggests under influence of Japonic, which suggests that it were the Japonic speakers coming in with rice later.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I don't have any scholarship in this context, but just trying to understand your point that if there are that much similarity, and if people moved around left and right and top and bottom, it might as well Korean people influencing Japanese. Why is it called Japonic? And and seeing those pre-Japonic culture in Chinese land, left side of Korea, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I know, and I also respect that for people. Well, Japan and Korea and China are very strong powers, so it is sometimes difficult for people to admit that the roots of their language, culture, and genes lie beyond their national borders. but that is very much the case. It's not only for the language, it's not only the origins of the language that we can reconstruct back to Northeast China, but we also did the genetic study. So I know there are many exact scientists here, so maybe the genetics will be a bit more convincing for you. The thing is that we were the first to analyze Korean samples of Korean genomes, full genomes from the Korean peninsula. And we were very surprised to find that Middle Neolithic Koreans are half Jomon ancestry, so the ancestry you find also in Japan, and half an ancestry that can be modeled as Hongshan ancestry. So that clearly shows that there was a massive wave of influx of people around the time that millet was imported from the Westlia River Basin into Korea. And moreover, we find a second wave of gene flow into the Korean peninsula at the time that rice agriculture was adopted. And that gene flow can be modeled as Shajajen ancestry. And it is finally this Bronze Age Korean ancestry that goes to Japan, where it causes a genetic turnover from the underlying Jomon ancestry to the incoming Shajajen. So the scenario of the linguistic dispersal is not only mirrored in the archaeobotanic dispersal of millet and rice, but we also see it in the genetic dispersal, in the gene flow. So it nicely maps on each other.
Hi, thank you for the very interesting talk. I have a question for Professor Lee. You mentioned that as part of your project, you did some isotopic analysis on the fatty acid extracted from the pottery, and to actually reconstruct the paleo diet at the time of the sediment. So I was wondering, could you give some additional information about how well the human and animal skeletal remains are preserved on the site? And is there a reason why, instead of doing isotopic analysis of human and animal skeletons, we're using pottery sherds?
I wish I can do human or animal remains, because there are simply no human and animal remains on Jeju Island at much later period. The Korean soil is notorious to not preserving organic remains except the shell maiden. But now we have gathering very interesting data from pottery. Not many people actually were doing this the isotope analysis and potsherd. So we are very proud we have expertise who can do that. So we are kind of extracting everything from remaining artifacts. The Professor Robbeets was the first one to able to extract the DNA from human remains. There is only a really small amount of human remains survived Neolithic period. And one of them are what she analyzed a cemetery site in early to late Neolithic period in Busan area. And if I comment that part, I'm not surprising because there is a lot of Jomon pottery in Korean, the southern part that she analyzed, and a lot of Neolithic type pottery and artifact in also Tsushima and Kyushu Islands. So if we do DNA analysis on the other part, we'll also see the mixture, because ancient people are not stationary, they move around and they intermarry or intermingle. So, but the human remains are very rare. And also isotope analysis on human remains is wonderful, but it's one or two individuals. So I found the analysis in pottery, which directly represent diet, because we have enough amount of pottery in Korea, and the success rate is pretty good. 50% we have success rate for potsherd to extracting isotope. So we'll continue to document instead of relying on one or two few human remains.
Thank you.
Thank you both for the amazing talk. And I have two questions for Dr. Lee. The first question is, because you mentioned that this in the specific site that you talk about in this presentation, the people that, according to the artifacts assembled and other residues remains, they are focused on like terrestrial animals and plants resources. Is there other sites in the island that have marine resources focusing so that people is moving around for specific resources, or they are just moving around other than resources oriented purpose? And the other questions, I would just put the two questions out. The other questions is, do they have connection with the inland Korea communities so that they have like interacting to each other?
Thank you for a great question. That's also our research question, why people move around up and down. And we do find the site along the foothills. The East Coast site that we are just starting, showing same kind of plant remains from pottery and grinding stone tools, and isotope analysis ongoing from East Coast at the moment. But my tentative hypothesis in each region have a different sourcing, and those people, early Holocene and Middle Holocene people continue the tradition moving around the source, and the food is a secondary. So because of Jeju, right on the coast, there is a really great beam and perch there, but they are not visiting that time. And other sites, listing analysis showing, focusing on more fishing too. So different diet, different subsistence, slight changes in focus, difference in focus in each region through the period. So our major goal is mapping all those sites according also research and topography and reconstruct, hopefully, their seasonal movement pattern.
My focus is on the Three Kingdoms period,
Mm-hmm.
and I have three questions. And the first is, if Pekche had a distinct language, the Pekche Lee, is it related to Kogoryeo? And the second question is, what language was the court language in Bohai or Parhe? And the third question is, when did something that was a peninsular common language of the elite emerge?
Thank you very much for your questions. That's very relevant questions for linguists. First of all, about the Pekje language, at least the Pekje language of the commoners. The Pekje language is a Han language, so one of the languages spoken in the southern tip of the Korean peninsula, and that was a Koreanic language. So unlike Goguryeo, which was closer to Japonic than to Koreanic. We know that there were pockets of Japonic speakers in the Han. For instance, Kaya, which is so you had the Mahan, the Pyeonhan, and the Chinhan. Kaya is the descendant of in the Nakdong area, so Mahan, and we know from the Nihon Shoki that the speakers of Kaya were very that the language of Kaya was very close to Japanese. So there were Japonic elements or Japonic pockets. We also know from toponyms, for instance, place names, that in the region of Pekje and Kaya, that these place names contain Japonic elements. And then we also have the Chinese dynastic chronicles that say that people of Kaya were close to the Wa, so to the people of Japan. So basically, Shilla language, Pekje and Kaya, to a certain extent, go back to Koreanic and were mainly Korean, but there were also pockets of Japonic speakers there. So your second language was about Parhe. I think that Parhe mainly contained Tungusic elements, but I don't think that was like ethnolinguistically a kind of monolingual unit. It might have comprised Koreans too. Probably by the big explosion of the Pekdusan, the people of Parhe got, well, more or less extinct, and the languages were completely erased. But there, I think there were Tungusic elements, so connected with the Sushen and the Jurchen. According to Chinese dynastic chronicles, there were 3 language families spoken on the Korean peninsula. You had the Puyo languages, like with Koguryo as a descendant in the northwest, Liaodong and northwest Korea. And then you had the Sushen, later the Jurchen, so the Tungusic speakers in the northeast, southern Primoria and northeast. And then you had in the south the Han speakers, which were the Koreanic speakers. You're welcome.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a super impressive talk. And I have a question for Professor Robbeets. So I saw there's some, if I don't remember wrong, you show some illustration showing there's some dispersion of certain languages, it's not following a linear trajectory, but more like a scattered kind of occurred in the Korean peninsula, like staggered scatter points. So I'm wondering what kind of what causes this kind of scattering. So it.
I mean the pockets like that I showed
Yeah.
southern Korean peninsula.
Yeah. So I'm thinking it does something relate to the people with high mobility, that kind of expertise in voyaging, or what? Since they are now following the linear migration track from on the land, but kind of voyaging through the coastal line, dispersed through the peninsula.
I'm afraid I cannot really answer the question what causes the pockets. Basically, I think you had Koreanic speakers, and then at the beginning of Mumun, 1500 BC, you get Japonic speakers with rice agriculture coming in. Of course, these speakers will look for the place where it's the cultivation of rice is most favorable, and then they settled in the southern Korean peninsula, like in the central and the western part, and like that, I think you got pockets of Japonic speakers who lived, and then hand in hand, say, with Koreanic speakers. But what exactly caused that? Yeah, the agricultural dispersals, I suppose. Yeah.
More questions?
Hi, I wish to ask a question to Professor Robbeets. In your PowerPoint, you showed kind of dispersal of language, like in different time bins. And I noticed that the map that you're using is based on the modern topography, while so with the kind of evolving landscape, for example, like concerning sea level change, as what Professor Lee's PowerPoint shows, like change the kind of simulation results or like the overall dispersal narrative that your like other kind of line of evidence would otherwise show?
I think that's a very relevant question. Yes, indeed. So that's also one of the reproaches that can be made for the Bayesian phylogeography. So we use Bayesian statistics to estimate the homeland. We combine that with classical techniques like the diversity hotspot technique or cultural reconstruction, and then we take kind of common where the different homelands overlap, there we would establish a homeland. But I certainly think that the information could be refined if we would insert parameters like the sea levels and other things into the model. However, the rising sea levels that Professor E showed go back to 16,000 years ago, while our language family the spread to the Korean peninsula was around 5,500 BP, so that's a big difference in time, and by that time the sea level was more or less stable. It would not make such a big difference for the phylogeography. But nevertheless, I think that these Bayesian phylogeographic methods should be refined so that we can insert parameters like geography also when there is a sea, and so now it's just like a random walk through space. So it's as if the whole area is the same. It just assumes that the accessibility of the area is the same everywhere, which is of course not the case. And that's also, I think, why it's very important not to believe too much in these new in the new computational techniques, but really to keep combining them with classical linguistic techniques that have been around for, well, centuries. Like, for instance, diversity hotspot, which determines the homeland of a family there where you find the greatest diversity with regard to the deepest subgroups in the family. So there are other techniques that should be combined in my eyes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
Hi, thank you for the talk. This is questions for Professor Lee. I had a question about Jobstier, found in Jeju. And I was wondering, as you've dated it, it's coming from Africa and maybe the Afro-Asian trade. When do you think it sort of entered into the Korean Peninsula and specifically Jeju?
What we found is a possible the starchy granule belong to the same genus of Jobstiers. So I don't think it's Jobstier itself. Is this site predates to Jobstier was domesticated in Africa. But this wild Jobstier genus species belong to same genus with Jobstier, or one of the native plants in southern China, which also Professor Li Liu were found in starch analysis in southern China in Neolithic period. So what I'm pointing is Jeju was connected before the 16,000 BP connected to southern China, and probably some of the vegetation were widely spread. And I hypothesis those possible wild Jobstier genus wild species were one of the procured plants during the Jeju Neolithic early Holocene on Jeju Island. So if I find the domestic Jobstier in Korea, I'll be all over in Nature Science Journal. Not yet. Probably not.
Thank you.
In archaeological point, migration is really interesting topic. We are focusing on material evidence. So I'm interested in how migration, also assimilation is both sides. It's not just recipient or newcomers, how the interactions. in archaeologically, we have not yet found a lot of massive evidence of migration yet, but millet definitely domesticated in northern China, and it seems to be now Korea has the millet much earlier than publication, but 2020 publication, 23 publication start to show its adoption is much earlier than Middle Neolithic period. One of the interesting thing is the particular type of pottery decorations is spread widely by Middle Neolithic period, but that tradition started from at least 7,000 years ago. As an archaeologist, I'm focusing on material, so interesting here your linguistic evidence. I wish I can interview people who made all those pottery or cultivated millet, but yeah.
I think our last book, do you want to say?
I just wanted to comment on that I agree. So if farming moves, we have been focusing a lot on crops, but you would expect that other features will move as well, that if farmers will bring along other material culture apart from the crops and the tools for the crops. And that's why we had a look at, together with the late Sarah Nelson, I had a look at textile technology, and we were really surprised to see that, like in whorls, you have flat whorls and biconical whorls in the Westlia River region at the time of millet domestication, and the biconical whorls moved to the Russian Far East, and the flat whorls moved at the time of millet agriculture to the Korean peninsula, and later with the Yayoization they are moved to Japan. So it seems that there are other features of material culture that move together with the crops and the tools as well, but I think that also needs further exploration. In any case, the words for the textile, spinning and weaving, complex textile technology, is also related across the Trans-Eurasian languages, suggesting that the ancestral language had complex textile technology, which is the case, for instance, for the Xinglonghua.
Okay, this question may be on behalf of our students who are taking language classes and also culture classes on Korea. If there's one insight based on your research, what would you like to share with our undergrad students who are not familiar with this ancient history and archaeological remains? Like, what would be the insight that you would like to share for them?
Well, perhaps it relates to the question that the lady asked me, that the insight is that that in the end we're all mixed. So we do not need to expect that our cultures, our languages, and our genes are homemade within the national frontiers. It's very hard, it's a challenge for people to accept that their origins, their languages, their genes, and their cultures lie beyond the national boundaries. But that's very much a fact, because in prehistory there were no national boundaries. So that's perhaps also a lesson that your Trump could.
For me, I'm writing a book about Neolithic Korea. My kind of emotional goal is often because of Flintstone, all those think about primitive culture before agriculture or after, before the written language is written, we think about they are not very capable people. But what I find, I study more and more, including Jeju, I saw how capable they are. In that kind of Jeju island environment, as well as other part of mainland Korea, their wooded area, I would not survive with knowing what they have. Even with all the camping gadget, I barely survive. So I try to understand their daily life and goals and emotions and dreams, and in their own term as an archaeologist, not in our binary standard. I no longer like the terms hunter-gatherers or farmers, because that's our binary term. So I try to go into their own, how they, and I found more and more how they have agency and capability. So I try to understand migration in the term, not just dominating one advanced technology, swiping all native, or the other way, I try to understand how's the human interaction with other humans or environment. So I had developing new respect to prehistoric peoples of long before the language, long before the written language.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Robbeets and Lee, for your wonderful talks. And thank you so much, Professor Underhill, for introducing our speakers. Thank you so much.